I'd like to thank the Labour Party for giving us the opportunity to discuss COVID strategy. And it is critical that we do, because, quite frankly, it beggars belief that the government is continuing to talk about living with COVID, and even more shockingly, that the Minister for Housing this week is citing arbitrary dates in a few weeks' time to reopen construction and other sectors of the economy, with the cheerleading of Tom Parlin of the CIF. This is a terrifying echo of the dire mistakes the government made in November and December that led to the terrible, fatal for many, surge in infections that we saw in January, and a situation where our health services were very nearly overrun and our healthcare workers are on their knees in the face of that surge in infection. So it beggars belief that the government, yet again, wants to go around for another twirl on the merry-go-round of surge and lockdown, with all the terrible possibilities that means in terms of deaths, in terms of sickness, in terms of the pressures on our healthcare workers, and the almost racing certainty of a fourth or a fifth lockdown. Have the government learned nothing from the last year or so and the terrible consequences of it? So I welcome the fact that there is a move from some of the opposition towards a different strategy. And it is absolutely right that Deputy Nash, for example, should talk about the need for humility and grace when it comes to recognising the mistakes that were made in the past. That, by the way, should extend also to opposition parties who are now rightly decrying the government strategy, but who in September of last year, in the case of the Labour Party, were calling for the pubs to reopen. We're decrying the public health guidelines as, quote, too draconian and bonkers, and we're calling for the resumption of international travel in September. There needs to be honesty about the mistakes that were made. If they're rightly criticising the government strategy and calling for an alternative strategy, those parties that didn't, who went along with the government's flawed strategy, should admit it, as we make the case for an alternative strategy. And that strategy is, as Deputy Shortall, who has been consistent in questioning the government strategy from pretty much the outset, along with People Before Profit and Deputy Pringle and the last Count Corla, you know, let's call a spade, who were actually challenging the flawed strategy that led to this dire cycle of surge and lockdown, with all the fatalities, all the pressures that it put on the health service. And that alternative is a zero-COVID strategy, to at least try, for goodness sake, to try and emulate what has been done in New Zealand and Australia and Taiwan and many other parts of Asia, where people have got their lives back, because the government didn't try there to live alongside a virus that kills, that makes people sick, that overruns health services. They understood you don't negotiate with a virus. A virus is not interested in a live and let live relationship which you can negotiate. The virus wants to kill, it wants to make sick people sick. So you can't live alongside it. You've got to chase the virus, you've got to eliminate the virus, and then you have to have the public health infrastructure, which is chronically lacking in this country, to deal with the outbreaks which inevitably will come up until we've completely eradicated, if we can ever eradicate. But at least we can deal with the outbreaks as they do elsewhere. And some of us have been arguing for that strategy, and that has to include mandatory quarantine. I spent most of Friday talking to an Irish public health doctor who is in charge of infection control in Queensland and Australia, and do you know what he told me? They haven't had a single COVID outbreak since June. Everybody in that territory are going to pubs and restaurants and going to school and going to work and living their life because they had a plan, they had legislation even before the pandemic broke out. They have public health teams that can deal with outbreaks, and therefore society can function. We can and must do the same. And lastly, we must support workers whose industries and sectors have been hammered, and we certainly shouldn't be taxing people on the economic supports we gave them.
Thank you.